Okay, so just before I start on the cataloguing process, I'm just outlining the stages of the project. So this is an overview of the workflow. So you can see that first we scope the collection, which is what I'll talk about next. Then the files are digitized. Then we do the first stage of cataloguing, which is like an overview of the collection as a whole. Then we do the second stage of cataloguing, which is when we're actually listening to the recording itself and writing a description. And finally, we do what's called building a SIP. So that's a submission information package, which brings together the digitized file and all the metadata associated with that, including the catalogue entry, together in one SIP. And then this is uploaded onto the British Library's digital repository. Just to mention that this is our workflow, the UOSH project workflow, so you're probably not going to follow this in your own workplace when dealing with sound collections.
So, cataloguing your collections. Where do you begin? So, before you rush into digitisation, it's a good idea to complete an inventory of the collections you hold. A conditions report or survey is something that you could apply to new collections deposited with you, or as part of the initial scoping of a collection you already hold to prioritise what you need to digitise and catalogue. There's an example of our conditions report on the slide. Within this kind of inventory, we aim to capture information such as file format, so are they tape reels, compact cassettes, CDs, their quantity, the physical condition of the items, so checking if they're mold damaged or if the tape itself has been damaged in any way. And then capturing information such as related paperwork, so that might be if there's any cue sheets or transcripts of the collection, and if there's any consent forms, for example.
Once you've completed the report, we move on to what's called shelf marking. This is just the British Library's term for applying a unique identifier or a reference number to the collection as a whole, and then subsequently to each individual item. It would be similar in an archive's use of a FONS level description, and then our FONS level numbers, and then reference numbers for each item. And this is just the back of one of the tapes, and this would have been the reference number for it, same as collection. Okay, so the next step in scoping your collections is to group items together where necessary. An example of where you would do this would be with an oral history interview. It could be recorded over 3 tapes. So you want to keep those tapes together in one logical catalogue entry. So that means that when they're played, they'll play as one long recording when they're on the British Library website. Okay, the next stage we do with scoping is creating a tracking sheet. This is just an Excel document, and it's not obligatory, but it's something we find useful because it identifies where each item is and at what stage they're at. So as this item's being digitized, this item's being it's been catalogued, it's had a SIP done. It also is useful for identifying any sensitivities with any of the recordings, so data protection concerns. So after all this is the end of scoping, and we move, the items are sent for digitization. I'm not going to cover digitization because it's a different session, but once they have been digitized, we move on to cataloguing them.
So the next step then is to begin cataloguing your collection. And if you don't have any previous experience in this field, don't worry. The underlying principles are very similar to cataloguing other types of records. Like I said before, all of our cataloguing is done into Excel spreadsheets, and these are formatted in a specific way so that they can be easily imported into the BL's Sound and Moving Image catalogue. If you don't already have a collection management system, a spreadsheet is a simple and effective way to catalogue. The cataloguing fields we use in UOSH follow the British Library's own guidelines for cataloguing sound, but broadly speaking, it's a hybrid of Mark 21 and YWL standards. It has many of the same core elements as Dublin Core, IZG, or Spectrum, but usually just with different words or terms for the fields, so you can adapt these quite easily. And on that note, that's kind of the main focus of this session, is that there isn't one bespoke software for cataloguing sound archives into, and many of you will be approaching this with your own collection management system in your institution. So as we're working through these slides, I'd encourage you to think about how you could adapt the field names to your own collection management system, or how you could just tweak things slightly so that they fit into your own in-house style.
Okay, so this is the 3 levels of cataloguing description that we have. Collection level, so that describes the collection as a whole. Product level, which describes the physical carrier, so the tape box and any metadata on that. And finally, recording level, which is a description of the recorded content. Okay, so we'll start with collection level. And here's a list of the fields that we use on the spreadsheet. So we have shelf mark, which, as I say, is just the reference number. Location. Oh, sorry, I'll try and speak up a bit. Maybe I'll put my microphone up a bit. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, so location. This is the original location of the collection. Because we're the hub and we've got collections from across the region, it's useful to know where that collection has come from, where that repository was. A collection title, a collection description, which is just a brief overview of the collection, an inventory, which just tells you, you could also know this as the extent or medium. So for example, you'll say 10 compact discs or compact cassettes, 3 tape reels, something like that. Whether there's any existing documentation, again, this is just general for the collection. And then these 3 together, genre, subject, and keywords. Genre and subject are taken from a predefined list from the British Library, but this is based on the Library of Congress subject and genre headings. So you could look at this when creating your own. And then the keyword field is a free text field that allows you to add a subject that isn't on the predefined list, but they're all just for discoverability of the collection. And then this is an example of a collection level description with the details added. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to look through that.
Next up is product level, which captures a description of the physical carrier itself, so a tape box or a CD. This is important because what's written on the carrier can provide useful information about the recording, such as content, date, who the author or producer was, playback speed, etc. However, what is written on the box may not reflect the content, which in itself is important to note. Most of the fields at collection level are repeated at product level, so you'll see some familiar words there. So we have shelf mark, location, and collection title. But we now also have call number, and this represents the playback order of the recordings. So, for example, an oral history interview, which runs over 5 tapes, can be played in the correct order together. We have product title for each item, and this is either taken directly from the tape box. So the example on the slide says Digging at the Past, so that's the title, or an assumed title that you can apply to it. there's a field called Original Analog Inventory. And this is where we record the extent, format, speed, and sound type, stereo or mono, of each item. If you're not very technical, like I am not, this part's usually filled in by our engineer who digitizes the recording. So whether you choose to do your digitizations in-house or use an external supplier, then they will normally tell you what it is. There's a field for product notes, and this is what we use to record anything that's on the physical carrier itself, even if we know that it doesn't reflect the contents. So there might be some additional information that's written on the tape box, which doesn't really relate to the recording, but it's important to put it on there. And then finally, we record whether there's any existence of documentation again. So that's cue sheets or transcripts. And I know that we mentioned that at collection level, but at item level, it's important because this is where you link it specifically to that tape box. So if the tape box itself has a transcript inside, you can then make a note of it and kind of apply it to that one. We found, just from our experience of cataloguing collections, you will undoubtedly come across a collection which half of the collection has transcripts, half of it doesn't. So it's helpful for the end user to be able to see which tapes have documentation and which don't. And just to mention here that any items which we have grouped together, like an oral history that's recorded over 5 tapes, we would keep them all together in one row of the spreadsheet and describe it with one product title, rather than having individual entries. So here is another example of a product level description for you. And before I move on to talking about recording level, we're just going to have a quick break from me talking now to, hopefully this will work, to listen to a short clip of recording. I'm going to play you an oral history recording taken from the Worcestershire Life Stories collection, which I think Maggie Tohill is here, so she works at Worcestershire where they're held. And whilst I play it, it might be good for you, or I'd encourage you to think about what information you would capture if you were creating a catalogue entry for the recording. And you can see on the slide, this is the documentation that's associated with it. I realise the writing's quite small, so you probably can't see, but we've got a picture of the tape, cassette tape box itself, and then there's a transcript, there's a deposit form, there's a summary sheet. So all being well, this will hopefully play, but you might have to bear with me a moment as I just stop sharing and then play you the clip. Hopefully.
This is Valerie Greaves talking to Mrs. Nancy Peacock of Cleahonga, October the 5th, 1997.
My name is Nancy Peacock, and I now live at Cleahonga, Hereford. I was born in Whitecross in Hereford, February the 1st, 1917, and I believe it was a dreadfully deep winter. And I think when I was born there was ice everywhere.
That was a very, very short clip of a recording, and hopefully you were able to just kind of get the ball rolling really and start thinking about how you would capture information for that recording that you were listening to.
So on that, this is what we would record at recording level. So again, just to say, recording level is the description of the contents of the recording. Again, fields carry over from the collection and product level spreadsheets, so shelf mark, call number, location. There are also several other mandatory fields which must be completed. So we have sound recording date. So even if it's very vague, you need to try and put something for that. The duration of the recording, the location of the recording, lists of the performers and contributors and their function. So from the clip, we would note the interviewer and the interviewee's details. Or if you don't know somebody's name or anything, you can just put unidentified male speaker, for example. It's useful to have the performers or contributors because later on, if you want to rights clear this recording and you know everyone who's contributed to it. Again, we have description of what's contained on the recording, and this can be anything from one sentence to a much fuller description, just depending on your time and resources. We have a recording note, which we use to capture any disruptions which occur on the recording. So in an oral history interview, if somebody's doorbell rings in the background and they stop the recording, or the quality of the audio is poor, you can put that in the recording note. There are a number of other fields which can be used but are not strictly necessary, as they are specific to different types of recording. So for example, broadcast title is a field, but it's only used when we're cataloguing radio programs. Field, another author is another field. And we would use that when recording like a composition of music. These are quite specific, so they don't obviously apply to all sound recordings. So it's best to start with a core set of fields and then add details depending on your recording type. It's also worth mentioning that the amount of detail you add depends on your resources. So we do two different types of recording level cataloging. We have one called preservation standard, which is a basic description, so you don't have to listen to the full recording, but you can give, a general description of it. And then we have a release standard, which is much more detailed. So for example, in an oral history interview, you would listen to the full thing and you would put time codes in throughout the recording to say where certain things were discussed. But that's very time consuming. So before you start a collection, it might be worth noting, which level of description you're going to use, so that you know how long the collection is going to take you to catalogue. Okay, so here is an example of a recording level entry.
And then if you're interested in what it looks like on the British Library's website, in the Sound and Moving Image catalogue, this is just an example. It's a bit small, I realise, so you probably can't see it very well. This is for a different radio programme. This is for a radio programme called Digging Out the Past, which was all about archaeology. And finally, a slide about data protection and special category data. So just to say that any data sensitivities present in the recording must be flagged by either the engineer or the cataloguer and recorded on the tracking sheet for assessment before making decisions to allow users to access the recordings. And on the screen is just the special category data. So I don't have time to go into this in any more detail, unfortunately, but we do have another session tomorrow on the on the topic of using sounds. So do check out Eventbrite for details of that if you're more interested in this topic in particular. Examples of just areas in which these sensitivities might occur are oral histories, for example. They're always quite problematic. So a interviewee might mention their religious practices, or they might mention in conversation that they were part of a trade union and activities like that. And sometimes they do use, particularly, I remember someone was mentioning about the 1970s. The later you go back, the more likely you are to have language that is no longer acceptable. So it is worth bearing these sensitivities in mind and making a note of these and flagging these, so that when you do come to access permissions, you're aware of them. It's always helpful to include where they appeared in the recording as well. So if you can keep a note of the timing or the duration in which, have a time code basically for when the particular sensitivity is mentioned, that's always helpful as well. And then the final step of our cataloguing process is quality checking. And so within the UOSH project, all of our spreadsheets and entries are quality checked for accuracy, both within our own team and then by colleagues at the British Library. And then once the catalogue entry has passed the quality check, this is then ingested into or imported into the sound and moving image catalogue. Initially, at the beginning of the project, we were checking 100% of each other's work, but this is now reduced to about 10% once we became familiar and confident with cataloguing. Whether you choose to quality check in your own workplace is dependent on your staffing resources and what's available, but it is quite helpful, certainly when you're learning a new skill or applying it for the first time, like many of you will be doing. It is important just to have someone else kind of check your work for consistency at the beginning anyway. So just to summarize what I've just been talking about, kind of 3 points really to take away. And the first is, first stage of approaching cataloguing is to first identify what you have in your collection, using a survey or conditions report, just to get a sense of the vast quantity, the file format types, how long you can then predict it will take you to catalogue, that sort of thing. They all sort of build into a prioritisation process, I suppose, in terms of assessing whether this collection will take a lot of staff resource or whether it's more durable, you know, in a certain amount of time. And then once you've scoped your collection, when you come on to catalogue it, trying to include these different fields as part of your cataloguing process is helpful. And then quality checking your work if appropriate, just to make sure that everything is consistent with what you're doing.